I think we'll start. So we've already introduced all of our speakers, colleagues. So we'll move quickly then into this next session. I'd like to ask Mr. Zakela Maisa to come to address us, please. Thanks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, let me recognize our Honorable Minister, Mr. represented here from all the countries. Ladies and gentlemen, my role is much simpler. I am here on behalf of the Youth Development Bank, which has been mentioned quite a lot by the previous speakers. I am representing Mr. Nale Ratsoma, who is our newly appointed Director General of the Africa Regional Center. Unfortunately, he did not make it due to other commitments. He has asked me to represent him and give you an overview of the New Development Bank, just to demystify it, and also with specific focus on the Africa Regional Center in terms of its role, in terms of its relevancy for not only South Africa but for the African continent. But before doing that, I will just give you an overview, general overview of the bank, because I cannot assume that everyone knows the New Development Bank is as a new institution that was established by this country. That is mainly focused on member countries, emerging markets, and developing countries. Our commitment to nations, just to give you US dollars 50 billion and paid-in capital of 10 billion US dollars. Our capital contribution is equal amongst members, and 5 member countries have equal ownership. No operate on an equal basis. We have in-house highly experienced management team from all the member countries. We apply rigorous risk management practices. Our instruments varies from debt instruments, which is loans. We also are working on developing guarantee or credit enhancement instruments to make our projects more bankable, where we face difficulties where other lending institutions will not come to the party in terms of offering guarantees. We are also looking at equity instruments to complement our debt instruments as part of the bank offering. We will also, currently we are still quite small. We rely on other financial or state lending or state institutes to advance our financing instruments. Our aim is to be more efficient and transparent without compromising quality. You will notice that multilateral development banks are known for long lead times in approving loans once projects have been identified. So we advocate for shorter lead times, in which we, on average, it takes us 6 months from identification to approval of a transaction, whereas some institutions may take quite long. How we achieve that for now is that we are still quite small, so we are still a very lean institution, and very flexible, and in terms of our management structure, and it takes the 5 member countries that make set decisions. The usual practices of transparency, following best practices especially with regards to the environmental and social safeguards. As we should be much quicker, but we don't want to learning this one. Move on to my next slide. And as you know, in terms of the BRICS contribution to the world economy, 53% of the global forex reserves are in these countries, 42% of the global population, and 31% of total global GDP. This is largely known. It's just background for information. I have highlighted that we are a bank of equals with the 5 member countries having the equal voting rights, which is distributed to 20%. I have also indicated that the bank is open to membership of other countries. The bank is also working on a strategy on how to BRICS member countries. I will give those of what we have recently done in that regard, especially in the SADC region. Slide and presents in terms of our policy, in terms of the key of the who has been involved in the creation of the bank and the macro BRICS agenda. So I will not in detail repeat what has been mentioned. But just to highlight the key milestones for the bank, the most recent one in terms of borrowings, the first issuance of the green bond in China, and the bank's general strategy that was also approved, which is started 2017 until 2021. Established in partnership with the global national institutions, global being the World Bank, African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, but also within our member countries with them. We are also working with the Industrial Development Corporation of South Africa, with the aim of advancing our products through them in terms of lines of credit, but also we don't want to limit ourselves to working through banks. We do lend directly to the state, which we are talking to the state. When I say the state, South African government, represented by Treasury, for lending projects that are experiencing market failure, and that projects that cannot be financed through the national state-owned entities. We have also lent through the national state-owned entities in the energy sector, transport and logistics sector. We are also looking at other sectors, especially water, as we know that water security for our region, especially South Africa, is quite an issue. There is a practical example where we are working with our neighboring country, which is a SADC country, Lesotho, that is sourced with water, because of how best we can channel that water to South Africa for economic and social use. So this is one practical example in terms of how we are advancing our lending products to non-member countries of the BRICS. As you know, Lesotho is not a member country of the BRICS, but the project itself is for the benefit of both Lesotho as a sovereign country and South Africa in terms of water security. So that's just an example of how we seek to advance our products outside South Africa. As it has been mentioned, last year in August, the Africa Regional Center was a key mandate of identifying projects for both in South Africa and the rest of Africa, as the acronym mentioned, is not the South Africa Regional Center, it's Africa Regional Center. That is, we need to just really emphasize on that. The office is still at its very elementary in terms of resourcing, with the permanent Director General recently appointed. There is a recruitment underway to recruit staff, with a few professionals joining us in the next few months, starting from next month. And also, we, as head office staff, we're still capacitating the office locally here so that it gains momentum. The mandate of the office I will just highlight on my next slide. One of the key developments post the summit, you will note we are part of the most recently, we were also added. When I say in the past, the bank is only just under 3 years, so 3 years in it. We just a double A plus in terms of our credit rating. We are countries in our bank. I think China is quite a well-resourced country in terms of its economy, the second largest economy, but we, unlike AFDB, EIBs and the likes, we don't have developed countries. So a double A plus, given the size of our membership, the size of our economies, is quite a good achievement. We can only build from that. See that we have not updated, but we'll update this slide just to reflect that information that I just shared with you. This slide is of our portfolio, which the country per hectare, and that is as end of April, but recently, at our last board during the summit, we approved, I'll highlight for South Africa, we approved 2 projects in the transport and logistics sectors, and also a line of credit for Development Bank of Southern Africa. As mentioned, we are currently appraising a water, mainly the African Development Bank. We are doing a joint appraisal. We are also talking to the state for a state lending for projects that cannot raise funding directly to the market through SOEs that the state has to handle. Those are projects that are largely happening in marginalized communities, in rural areas. Those are projects that also affect our people in terms of the marginalized ones, especially in terms of accessing social services, which is largely health and education, improve our quality of our educational institutions and also improve quality of our health institutions, especially in underdeveloped and marginalized areas. This slide just gives a highlight of our process in terms of how we seek to process our operations, from project identification to approval. You will notice that we are aiming to structure, negotiate, review, and approve loan within 6 months without compromising credit quality. We do a thorough screening. We do a thorough credit analysis. We also advocate for strong anti-money laundering management checks. We also subscribe in terms of environmental and social development analysis. So we are a development bank largely, but also we want to do it differently compared compared to what is existing without compromising best practices. This slide just highlights our key features. We use country systems. We don't impose our policies on a country. We have appraised all the countries' systems of our member countries who are satisfied that they are sound. So our funds come back with conditions that our countries do not appreciate. We subscribe to gender equality. We subscribe to environmental conditions that the world is faced with. We need to cooperate with existing, but also forge our path and do things differently. In terms of the Africa Regional Center scope, this is my last slide that I just want to emphasize on. As I've indicated, this office is open not only for South Africa, but for the rest of Africa. We have started with the Super Highlands Water Program. We are also talking to other neighboring countries. Our colleagues in Mozambique, the recent SADC Energy Ministerial Summit on Energy. There are projects that have been identified in sectors of gas, and we are also looking at the interconnections of power. The SADC, we know that African Development Bank and other banks have been looking at various energy transmission projects that will also need additional financing. So we seek to complement all those efforts. The aim of and the core mandate of the office is project identification, also liaising with the key stakeholders in South Africa and the rest of Africa as the bank outlines its strategy on how it seeks to bring in other projects in other African countries, not only SADC ones, but beyond SADC, as and when we get the projects there. But also the office would be largely be responsible for portfolio management and project post-approval project administration. And it will be an interface between the bank, South Africa, and the region, as I've indicated. We also seek to grow the office in terms of providing knowledge management, partnering with research institutions. We don't have in-house research departments. We advocate for using or partnering with the academia in our member countries, and because we of the view that all our 5 member countries have a very rich knowledge that rests with institutions of higher learning like this one. Without taking much, other speakers' time, I would like to end it here, having just given you a snapshot of the New Development Bank. So specifically, its role in Africa for development. That's a concluding statement. Some of the numbers have been mentioned in terms of our targets for lending. We have, as to date, we are at $7.1 billion US dollars. With South Africa, we are just under $1 billion. The Lesotho Highlands water scheme and the direct state lending will take us to South Africa portfolio to 1.8 billion in the next 6 months. So I think given that we started quite slow for the South Africa portfolio and the rest of Africa, we aim to accelerate that. The challenge that the bank is facing is relevancy, especially in the youth and the women-led sectors, and we aim to look at how best we can seek other financial intermediaries where we can advance our financial products so that those key sectors that drive the economy, especially SME, can access our funds without being less encumbered with being encumbered with conditions that may just not work for them. So we are in open dialogue with key stakeholders within government. I cannot mention at this stage because the discussions are at this stage, but maybe during our next annual meetings, which will be hosted here in South Africa next year, we will be having a clear message in terms of how we seek to advance that. At this stage, I will end it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, Honorable Minister, fellow participants. It is a great pleasure to represent the President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Deshina, who couldn't be here, but sent his very personal regards and wishes us the best in this conference, and indeed to represent the African Development Bank Group family in this conference. The African Development Bank Group shares the spirit and intentions of the conference. Needless to point out, Africa is currently home to over 1.2 billion people, accounting for about 16% of the world's population. Nevertheless, our continent has a lot of ground to cover in terms of households in Africa do not have access to electricity. More than 41% of Africans still live below the poverty line. Africa's share in global trade is insignificant, accounting for a mere 2.2% and 3.2% of merchandise exports and imports respectively in the year 2016. From our perspective, key challenges hindering Africa's development include infrastructure deficits, weak governance, political instability, underdeveloped private sector, skills shortage, lack of economic transformation, and heavy dependence on the extractive sector and subsistence agriculture, among others. Notwithstanding these challenges, Africa's economic growth rebounded to 3.7% in the year 2017, up from 2.3% in 2016, and is forecast to rise further to 3.8% in this year. Despite the improved economic performance, most African economies are operating far below their full growth potential and lag behind in terms of the growth level needed to achieve most of the targets set out in the Sustainable Development Goals. On current trends, many African countries will actually miss the opportunity to eliminate poverty, hunger, and other forms of human deprivation on the continent by year 2030. Furthermore, the positive growth record in Africa in 2017 masks other deep-seated issues. Although fiscal and current account positions improved on average, they remain a source of concern, especially among the commodity exporting economies, which were slow to adjust to changing macroeconomic situations. Several of these countries saw a hike in inflation, with the average rate in Africa climbing to 12.7% in 2017. Similarly, while the risk of debt distress remains low or moderate for more than 60% of Africa's economies, some countries have accumulated very high levels of debt, raising concerns about their debt sustainability. This is particularly a challenge in the Southern African region. Structural change in the continent has also been slow, with a slow pace of diversification from extractives to higher productivity sectors. In several of the fastest growing economies, challenges of unemployment and inclusive growth persist, with job creation only half that of output growth. In the face of rapidly growing populations and heightened risks of social unrest, joblessness remains a serious concern for African policy makers and for all of us. Despite these challenges, the coming years are a window of opportunity to accelerate progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals for Africa. Building on nearly 2 decades of strong economic growth and rapid urbanization, Africa needs to achieve industrial development and structural transformation to create jobs at scale and promote prosperity across the continent. As Africa's development financial institution, whose sole mandate is the development of Africa, the African Development Bank is uniquely placed to support Africa's economic transformation and development. The African Development Bank's intervention in Africa is focused on 5 major priorities, usually termed the high fives. The first one is to light up and power Africa, which is basically aimed at addressing Africa's enormous power deficits and meeting growing energy demands from the private sector. The second one is to feed Africa by supporting the continent to move from traditional farming into commercial agriculture and agribusiness to reduce poverty, create jobs, and improve food security. The third one is to industrialize Africa. This is to ensure that Africa makes effective use of opportunities created by its youthful labor force and rapidly expanding towns and cities, which are opening up new opportunities for industries that can supply growing consumer markets and participate in global value chains. Africa is at the bottom of the global value chain and should industrialize to reverse this trend. The fourth one is to integrate Africa. This is aimed at facilitating deeper economic integration to foster industrial development through economies of scale across Africa's national markets. With Africa's combined population of over 1.2 billion and GDP of $3.4 trillion, the potential gains from integrating the continent are huge. At present, however, intra-Africa trade is just 14.2% of total goods trade, partly because of the high cost of trading across borders. And the last priority for us is to improve the quality of life for the people of Africa. This is to facilitate inclusive economic growth, which has been talked about. Africa's economic growth has outpaced that of the rest of the world for most of the past 2 decades. This growth has, however, not translated quickly enough into progress on poverty reduction. Furthermore, in implementing our 10-year strategy covering the year 2013 to 2022, the African Development Bank focuses on 3 cross-cutting and strategic areas. These include the first one being conflict and fragility, which remains a major constraint on Africa's development, holding back the prospects of economic transformation in many countries, particularly in the Horn of Africa and the Sahel. The second cross-cutting issue is climate change, which is already affecting hundreds of millions of Africans, exacerbating poverty and food insecurity, while large areas of the continent remain vulnerable to water shocks. And the third cross-cutting issue is women empowerment. Women are central to the African economy, performing the majority of agricultural activities, owning a third of farms, and in some countries, accounting for 70% of employees. Yet, continued gender inequality imposes a significant barrier to women's economic opportunities. Coming closer to home, South Africa is the largest economy and a key driver of regional integration in the Southern African region, and a key player in the continent's integration. So, South Africa's partnership with the BRICS group provides an enormous opportunity for deepening cooperation, not only among the member states of the bloc, but also the entire developing world to which the African continent belongs. The African Development Bank is emboldened to learn that during her 2018 presidency of the BRICS, South Africa is working closely with other member countries to mobilize resources and capacity to overcome the current economic constraints and take advantage of new opportunities for investment, promote growth and development, and address rising unemployment, poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment in Africa. We note that the BRICS investment finance institutions, including the new Development Bank, African Regional Center, and the contingency reserve arrangements, will provide much-needed infrastructure investments and financial support in these times of difficulties. The African Development Bank is keen to work closely with these BRICS institutions to see greater economic development in South Africa and the continent as a whole. As such, the African Development Bank is in discussion to jointly finance development projects in South Africa with the new development banks. The African Development Bank also sits on the infrastructure working group of the South African BRICS Business Council. African countries must fast-track structural transformation to create more jobs and reduce poverty. This calls for massive investment, estimated at least 40% of the continent's GDP, in sectors with strong potential for growth and job creation. African economies must therefore set up efforts to mobilize resources domestically through savings and taxes. Given the massive funding requirements for African infrastructure, external finance will remain critical. The investment needs to finance Africa's sustainable development goals are estimated at about 600 to 700 billion per year. Africa needs about 150 billion a year until the year 2025 in infrastructure investment alone. These needs cannot be met by governments and multilateral donors alone. Broad-based partnerships and collective efforts are needed, with the private sector playing an active role. As a response to these needs, the bank continues to implement the High Five Agenda and the 10-year strategy to deliver strong development results on the ground in Africa. Through its sovereign and non-sovereign windows, the bank is financing projects and programs that create jobs to support small and medium-term enterprises and to deliver inclusive growth. For example, in the year 2017, with the disbursements climbing to a record 7.6 billion, African Development Bank provided 14 million people with access to transport, built or rehabilitated 2,500 kilometers of roads. 4.4 million people were provided electricity thanks to the Light Up and Power Africa priority. 210 owner-operated and small medium-sized businesses benefited from better access to financial services, thereby advancing the industrialized Africa priority. Over 8.5 million people were provided with improved agriculture technologies, promoting the Feed Africa priority, and 8.3 million people had better access to water and sanitation, helping to improve the quality of life for the people of Africa. In addition, the bank leveraged about 6 billion in co-financing for private sector operations across the continent in 2017. As you're aware, the African Development Bank, in partnership with South Africa and other stakeholders, will host an African Investment Forum in November this year in Johannesburg. The African Investment Forum is a totally transactional event that is dedicated to working with global pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and other institutional investors to leverage investment in Africa. The sole function of the forum is to develop and structure deals, promote deals, close deals, and execute deals. The African Development Bank invites BRICS partners to actively participate in this investment forum, which is the first of its kind on the continent. Let me close by urging us all to work together to promote the development of the continent. I thank you.
Dear Minister, dear colleagues, friends, distinguished guests, I just would like briefly talk about BRICS collaboration in education, and in particular on BRICS Network University in establishment and in activity of which I take some part. But I will start with kind of rationale behind BRICS cooperation in education, and the question is quite simple: why do we need to collaborate in education and science? You know, what is the added value of such collaboration? Why don't we collaborate with you know, established universities of global north, you know, highly ranked ones, and be you know, satisfied with that, or collaborate with our with our neighbors? What BRICS collaboration in education would bring us? Well, these are just several reasons why we do need to engage in such collaboration. And obviously, the first one is that our countries share some problems which are important in our local, regional, and global contexts. I mean, such problems as cybersecurity, poverty, unemployment, impact of climate change, water, you know, resources and pollution treatment, etc., etc. We, during, you know, well, some 10, 20, 25 years, our countries went through quite radical transformation. And in this transformation, we developed something which can be called, you know, best practices, which can be shared among our countries, which are worth sharing. Well, economic development in China, you know, fight against poverty, and remarkable things that Brazil managed to do during the last 10, 15 years, etc., etc. All these practices, you know, should be taught and should be shared in academic world. Growing collaboration of global south and labor market needs. For example, in Russia, in banks, you know, the officer with the knowledge of Chinese will immediately get much more salary than, you know, the officer without such knowledge. So growing collaboration in global south between our countries to require some skills which our students can get through establishing, you know, joint programs in our universities. There is a necessity in the majority of our countries. There is a necessity to overcome, you know, the remnants of neo-colonialism in, especially in education and research, in education and science. Professor Arisitas today talked about the need for the new concept of the development, or for the new model of the development, and certainly education will or should play a pivotal role in such a concept. speaking about global educational market today, we we are situated in the or we are witnessing actually crystallizing what can be called transnational educational capitalism, with this growing market of educational growing market of global education. And now our countries must work hard in order to establish themselves in this context, and I will show later some slides devoted to that. In speaking about universities of our countries, I mean, we have generally underdeveloped horizontal links between our universities. The collaboration between the universities, say in Russia and in South Africa, it used to be during Soviet time, or between Soviet universities and the universities in India, for example, it used to be quite intense. For the moment, it's not the case. I would start with I mean, this is basically rationale. We have shared problems, and we have practices to share, and our students need to know other universities. However, I will not start with these associations of BRICS countries. I will start with so-called excellence projects. At least some of our countries are involved in these projects. Famously China and Russia. But actually, creation of these excellence projects is a kind of trend, or used to be a trend, since 1990s up to today, with the aim of again getting the share of this global education market, or better share of this global education market, and with the aim of advancing in global academic rankings. So the money is pumped into the systems of higher education in some countries. Well, in 1990s, Denmark, Finland, and Hong Kong started these kind of projects. South Korea and China, and in 2010, Russia is the last one to start the project, which is in Russia called Project 5100. So you can see that China, allocated $6 billion for these purposes, and of course, Chinese, the volume of the Chinese system of higher education and the volume of money is quite remarkable. Now, speaking about academic rankings, so the idea behind the excellence project is to better integrate into the old academic system, to advance in these academic rankings, and to get proper share of the global educational market. However, even with this money, what BRICS countries actually achieved, you can see in comparison with, for example, UK universities. So in top 200 times higher education, there are more than 30 universities of UK and only 6 universities of China. Well, Russia has just one university, South Africa has 2 universities, and India and Brazil do not actually feature in the top 200. The situation is more or less similar in all main academic rankings. The 3 main academic rankings, Times Higher Education, QS, and Shanghai academic rankings, more or less the same. So it is extremely unlikely that the universities of BRICS countries are able to compete with UK or US universities in foreseeable future in academic rankings. And what does it mean? This means that the global educational market is constructed in such a way that there are certain centers of global academic power. There are certain centers of where, the resources and the students go. And these channels, are created in such a way that resources go in one way, from global south to, and students go one way from global south to global north. And, the models of creating, the models of operating goes, another way from global north to global south to imitate. However hard we try, we would not get further in this, kind of game, just because, so-called Matthew effect holds for global academic rankings as it holds for any kind of reputational game. I mean, those who are rich will be richer, and those who don't have reputation, they will lose, in the results of the game. So this is how the things, are in this academic world. Well, the idea behind BRICS networks and associations, as we try to establish it, is very different. It's not about better integration to global academia. It's not about imitating, models of organizational models of the universities of global north. It is rather about focusing on shared problems and common challenges of our countries, with the aim to help societies to address most pressing issues. And sometimes, we cannot still offer, but we seek alternatives to the existing academic programs, organizations, and practices. So BRICS collaboration in education is about providing an alternative to the existing, global academic model. Well, we try to do it through developing horizontal ties between the universities, while all excellence projects, if I compare with excellence projects, are more, about creating a pyramid of universities, ranked and such. So they are vertically structured, and associations are more horizontally structured. Well, speaking about BRICS collaboration, unfortunately, we are far from achieving this aim for the moment. BRICS countries have very different education and research structures. So, for example, one of the analysts of higher education, Philip Albach, even wrote an article which is called, titled "Nix the BRICS," at least in higher education. So his idea is that we are so different that we don't really have anything in common, and we cannot, meaningfully collaborate. Collaboration in education in any, BRICS country, any pair of the BRICS countries, actually intense only with China. It's everywhere. China is kind of the center with which every country collaborate, but not, among, well, say, Russia and Brazil, or Russia and South Africa. It's more like Russia and China. This is, the developed collaboration. Collaboration in research is also very limited. There are no large network projects in science between BRICS countries, although, lately, during these couple of years, there are some projects which specifically aimed in BRICS collaboration, provided by some organizations. Okay. Well, this is just a very short, just illustration to what I said. In BRICS Network University participants, there are 5,400 plus students from the BRICS countries, and 5,120 are from China. So all other BRICS countries, I mean, they send only very limited number of the students. So collaboration, at least in kind of education, is intense only with China. So these are the same kind of data in this kind of diagram. I would skip part of the slides, and I will go to immediately to the projects we have for the moment in education together. The first one is BRICS University League. This project was initiated in 2013. In 2014, the first summer schools were held in Shanghai and in Yekaterinburg. In 2015, the league has been mentioned in Brazil, the declaration of the second meeting of the BRICS Ministers of Education. The metrics were discussed, and a Beijing consensus has been signed in Beijing in October 2015. However, after this time, not much actually happened in BRICS University League, although this year, the Chinese Ministry of Education decided to, energize this project and, asked Fudan University to, to coordinate, this establishment of the BRICS University League, and hopefully, the situation will change. I think that this project, being a project of the universities themselves, is needed for established collaboration and education. BRICS Network University is much more developed, but it is the initiative not of the universities themselves. It's the initiative of the ministries. The MOU has been signed by the BRICS Ministers of Education in November 2015. For the moment, there are 56 universities in the network, the network works on 6 thematic priorities, which reflect the shared problems of which I talked today: BRICS studies, computer science, information security, ecology, climate change, water resources, pollution treatment, economics, and energy. This network has international governing board, which has been formed and gathered already 4 times in Russia, India, China, and last time in Stellenbosch in South Africa. In each country's activities managed by BRICS NU National Coordinating Committee. There are 6 working groups working on these priorities, and the aim of the university is to establish, of the network is to establish joint master and PhD programs in these 6 priorities. So there were conferences held, and kind of statutes and various documents adopted. I just would like to mention that after the last Ministers of Education meeting in Cape Town, the declaration has been adopted, and I think 6 articles out of 14 are devoted to the BRICS Network University. So BRICS Network University is, for the moment, the only working and existing association of the BRICS universities in education. Now, what has been already achieved after 2 years of the project? In 2017, 4 programs in computer science have been already launched, 2 programs in ecology and climate change. In 2018, 1 more program in computer science, 1 program in water resources, program in BRICS studies, programs in economics, and programs in energy will be launched. And there are plans, of launching some programs in 2019. So we hope that after September 2019, the project will be fully operational. However, we do have current problems, and there are some challenges to overcome. First of all, there should be established clear financial mechanism how the universities, participating universities, are financed nationally and internationally, and there is no still general agreement of how the countries will would support the universities. Secondly, the decision mechanism in BRICS network university is rather difficult. All decisions are taken by consensus by all 15 IGP members, and this is part of the very difficult, complex, actually international projects, and it's a bit slow to develop. So there is a need of permanent secretariat, and probably this kind of secretariat will be established, hopefully, sometime. There is apparent contradiction between the cherished value of inclusion on the one hand and strictly limited number of the participants. Each country has not more than 12 universities in the network, and in some countries, for some countries, it's it's fine. For others, like China, Russia, or Brazil, the amount of the universities is too limited. However, in order to start the project, 56 universities is already a large amount. So there is a need to develop BRICS University League as a kind of sister institution to BRICS Network University, for them to work together and to actually, to work together and to be more inclusive. Finally, we need to develop research collaboration in addition to educational one, and hopefully to develop research in these areas which are of shared interest. Thank you very much for your attention. That's basically it.
I promise I'll only take 60 minutes.
We're under pressure, unfortunately, colleagues. My apologies to do that.
Sorry. Right. Mine is it's always very brilliant when you are all talking after other people have spoken, because my presentation now is just a simple response to the presentations that have been made so far. And I'll tell you briefly about the DBSA, and in all of the slides, I've got a lot of slides, but I'll times just pick up the ones that are very relevant to what we are talking about. All of them are, but just the key ones where I'm trying to highlight specifically the development challenge that Africa faces and the DBSA's response to it, as well as the development challenges. But let's just tell you briefly about who the DBSA is. We are an entity of the South African government. We're a development finance owned by the South African government. We report to the National Treasury. We are capitalized by them, but we don't get an annual capital injection. We borrow. Our funding is funded through borrowings that we raise in the capital markets, as well as from international TFIs. We were started in order to support the apartheid state in 1983. In 1997, our mandate was changed to then look at development and to really focus on development finance in Africa, specifically in the SADC region. And we therefore focused on, we were then given the mandate to then focus on the SADC region. We driven by 4 mission critical issues. One, we are about economic development. That's why we focus on infrastructure sectors. We are also about social development, and that's why we also focus on the social sectors that we'll talk about. And 3, we are about regional integration. We are about enabling Africa to increase trade from the 14% of total, trade, intra-African trade, from the 14% that was mentioned to much bigger. And therefore, we really about economic integration. We're also finally about leaving a sustainable future for our children. Ari, you spoke about moving from gray to green. We've got products to enable moving from gray to green. Dave, you were talking, I think you mentioned money not being the problem. You'll see what the DBSA is doing to address exactly that problem. We focus on 7 infrastructure sectors. Again, the money you mentioned, that 49% of Africans don't have access to electricity. That's what we're about, and you will see what we are doing. Transport, you cannot have trade without transport. ICT, a lot of Africans don't have access to ICT, even in rural areas in South Africa. Water and sanitation is a big problem. You're in this specific hall, you need student accommodation in South Africa. The government announced free higher education for qualifying students. They have to be housed. Currently, only 16% of contact university students have got access to student accommodation. We are working with the Department of Higher Education and Training to enable, to increase that number to at least 30% by 2030. Human settlements. Our country has done very well. We've provided more than 4 million households with housing since 1994, but many more, especially in urban areas, need human settlements. But in order to have a human settlement, you need basic bulk infrastructure. The DBSA focuses on that bulk infrastructure, and then specifically health. And I'll give you specific instances. Many of the clients that we focus on, being municipalities, even central government, even whether across in Africa, the rest of the continent, or in South Africa, or provincial government, lack capacity to do planning. Before we even talk, Dave, about preparation, we lack master planning. The DBSA addresses that specific problem. 2, we've got problems with preparation, and you will see how the DBSA responds to that. Then you need to raise funding. And again, I agree with you, Dave. It's not a problem of funding. It's a problem of properly prepared. But it's how we leverage the capacity of the DBSA and other DFIs in the country to enable the increased flow of funding. And then, of course, another big problem in our country is infrastructure acceleration. And I think it's throughout the African continent. But our capacity for now is focused on helping government accelerate. I'll give you good examples of that, what we've done. And then finally, a big problem across all 3 spheres of government is maintenance of infrastructure. We are only about infrastructure at the DBSA. There are other TFIs like the Industrial Development Corporation and the Land Bank and the new development housing bank for housing. They are specifically focused on other things. We just focus on infrastructure. Project preparation. Here is what you are talking about, Dave. The fact that there is a need for 228 billion rands in infrastructure, but you need at least 5% for project preparation. That's about $11 billion that needs to be dedicated to projects. How much has been so far? By 2016, only about $800 million was available for project preparation for projects on the African continent. So the gap, $10.6 billion. As a result of lack of properly prepared projects, infrastructure financing in Africa declined, as that slide shows. What is the DBSA doing? We've got a dedicated project preparation division, as I showed you. But let's not talk about theory. Let's show you what specifically we've achieved. These slides are available. We've got a number of project preparation capabilities. Specifically, again, Ari, let me talk about the Global Environmental Facility. Let me also talk about the Green Climate Fund. That's more than $10 billion. That's available globally. The DBSA is the only accredited agency in South Africa for projects throughout the African continent. We are jointly accredited throughout the continent with the AFD or AFDB, but that is for graying, moving from gray to green. So what we're saying is, please come and talk to us. This is for throughout the African continent. Specifically, we also have a partnership with the European Union, the infrastructure program for South Africa, where again, we help to prepare projects for a number of products. We can chat more about it. So there's your green to green. And you'll see specifically another partnership with the Department of Energy in South Africa on moving from gray to green. And by the way, those products that I highlighted before, they are for the entire African, sub-Saharan Africa. We focus as the DBSA on sub-Saharan Africa, across the 7 infrastructure sectors. Currently, we are looking at a project pipeline of around 20 billion US dollars. Of that, again, the money you were talking about energy. 64% of the projects that are in preparation are in the energy sector. 47% of the projects of that 20 billion is focused on the rest of Africa. Only 53% is focused on South Africa. Let's look at specifically, these are some of the products that we have on the lending. But again, I don't want to talk theory, I want to take what the DBSA has done. These are some of the projects, infrastructure, qualifying infrastructure, water, roads, and energy. But what have we done? Renewable energy is a big growth area in South Africa. I'm proud to say, as a result of the partnership between ourselves and the Department of Energy and National Treasury, we have a renewable energy industry in South Africa. That's more than 200 billion rands that has been invested so far from rounds 1 to round. That is as a result of the partnership. And we are also very proud that the prices have been coming down every bid window. We started at 2 rands 52 cents per kilowatt hour. Now with bid window for it was 77 cents per kilowatt hour. What impact have we had? Directly 200 billion. I mean, that when we did that slide was 193 billion. The DBSA itself directly, we've invested in 21 projects that are generating more than 2,500 megawatts, 16 billion rands of that. And of course, socio-development, specifically, we're enabling participation by historically disadvantaged individuals in South Africa in that renewable energy. And these are across all the renewable energy sector. CSP, PV, wind, across all of them. More than 2,500 megawatts of projects. Again, remember I mentioned municipalities. We look across all the different municipalities, whether metropolitan municipalities, intermediate as well as smaller municipalities, rural municipalities. These are some of the national, international, and global partners that we work with. And hopefully, we will, as I can have the the New Development Bank on that slide. Is it there? Maybe it is, I might have left. Yes. One other final one from myself, delivery. I mentioned that one of the key problems that we have in our country is service delivery, acceleration of provision of infrastructure. We work with the National Department of Health, we work with the Department of Basic Education, we work with provincial departments, we work with municipalities, as well as international development partners to accelerate service delivery. And this is across these specific sectors: water, health, housing, education, roads, public. And here are a few. This is the sort of impact that we've had, especially in the Eastern Cape, where some of our learners learn in a school like the one that's on the left. Still today, there are still children that are still learning under trees. We help government accelerate, through our project implementation, from moving from there to a school that's looking one day right and in the middle. And this is what one of the schools looks like. We also help with human settlement. This is what we've done. You move people from the left to the right. You move people from a school at the bottom to the school. We help government to accelerate infrastructure. We also work with municipalities. Social infrastructure that we provide across South Africa. Thank you very much. How did you know?
JP Morgan, ABN
number.
Okay. So I know my watch is wrong, but it says dead on 12 o'clock right now. That's really great. I want to thank our colleagues for rushing through their presentations, but still making them very coherent and informative. So thank you very much, colleagues. Join me, please, colleagues, in saying thank you. Right, so according to the program, we should be reconvening outside for a group photograph. But I think, if you don't mind, let's take a couple of comments and questions from the floor. So the lady in the middle there, on the end I know was going to ask the first question. There's a question at the back over there, an arm over there, hand here. So there are three. Shall we take those three as responses to our inputs, please? Please go ahead.
Thank you. The professor who presented is not around.
He's here. He's here.
Thank you. Mine is about during this South African BRICS presidency. I'm wondering the key ingredients that enable the African continent to reconfigure the economic growth, the key ingredients. Because you say that we have to reconfigure, not rewinding, but reconfigure. And then the last one, you talked about moving some of, said the Development Bank of South Africa has hoped to transform from the left to the right, the schools, the water, and all that. I'm just wondering to what extent, or percentage, can you call it, does not show to what extent it hoped South Africa to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. The back over there, please, the gentleman there. Will you please say your names, colleagues, as you speak, please?
Hello everyone, I'm Mascoli Maliza from UNAGO, a non-government organization. On mine, I think it will actually be a comment, not a question. Because I'm just thinking, as most people presented, that actually there's what they call capitalism and capital. It means that there's an economy that you can create without really requiring the capital for you to start. I know for a fact because there's a company that we have actually started using an app in providing consulting services. But what we had to do was just to sit down and use data and build an app. So, but now the issues that I have, for instance, I haven't heard people presenting it that whether we can create an infrastructure that can enable kids in the townships that they can actually use their brains in coming up with these ideas that they won't have to actually need to buy machinery and do other things. So, but what I'm trying to sort of address, there's a sector which can be exploited without really requiring a large capital. So I think then it would be very important for the BRICS, especially South Africa, to actually exploit that, especially in connection with the Ministry of Small Business.
Thank you. Thank you. Over here, please.
Hello everyone, my name is Prachi. I'm from a labor market think tank called Just Jobs Network based in India. I have a clarification from Mr. Maisa on the New Development Bank. So during your project evaluation phase, in terms of how are projects evaluated in terms of their success and outcome metric, and how does that align with the broader vision of eliminating poverty, unemployment, and inequality in the region? And in the context of high levels of informality that the economies in all these countries have, and high amounts of youth employment, for instance.
Okay. So I'm going to ask all of the panelists for quick closing comments, and also as those questions were put to them, to answer the questions, please. So just no closing comments.
Okay, there was no question specifically addressed to me, but one thing I need to say is we also have to push the burden on our governments to focus on development, and I think the minister made that very clear in terms of prioritizing, in terms of planning, in terms of focusing the resources on development. Education is going to be very important. Having an enabling environment is going to be very important. Having a stable macroeconomic environment is going to be very important. Doing all this will be able to enable us to move forward as a continent. Thank you.
Thanks. Professor Kemba?
Well, I just would like to again to emphasize the importance of education and collaboration in education, especially in this search for the new models and the best of developments in South-South cooperation of BRICS.
Usmani?
No. Anyway, the lady that asked about, can I give you those numbers later on, because they are in our annual report, so I don't want to give you a wrong figure, but it's been substantial. Another point is that we work in collaboration with other entities of state, where government chooses different entities of state to help to accelerate delivery of school infrastructure and hospital infrastructure. So I will give you those numbers later, just during the break. My final comment, I think I would like to echo the points that have been made around education. Our target, I think, in terms of the number of university students enrolled in South Africa is about 1.5 million by 2030. And also we've got the technical vocational education and training colleges that also, because not everybody can get into university. But there is no, China is very successful, India is very successful, Singapore is very successful, South Korea is very successful because of the investments that they've made in people. We will not succeed if we don't make an investment in our people. And we have to do that. The fourth industrial revolution is about big data, for example. Big data needs a workforce that can work with it. And we need to continue investing in our people. If we want to deal with the 9 million people that are unemployed in South Africa, 3 million of whom have given up on looking for a job, we're not going to be able to do it if we don't empower them to get out of poverty. And education is the only one that has enabled me to be sitting there. And I think we can do it for many more other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think on my side, the question was how do we identify our projects and how do we ensure that our projects make development achieve the development outcomes. For the 5 member countries, our agenda, the defense agenda, is determined by the member countries. The objectives of the member countries in their development outcomes. For this purpose, we have commenced with the drafting of our country plans, which influence in terms of the agenda for the next 5 years per country in terms of what the bank will be doing. Each country plan will differ because our countries are quite diverse in terms of their developmental needs. South Africa will differ to what China is doing in their zone. As we identify a project also as it's a norm with multilateral development banks, we do what we call a design monitoring framework, which other institutions are referring to as a block frame. But basically, it's a framework to identify the developmental outcomes that we want to achieve associated with that project. We spend a significant amount of time designing that, and that is ultimately being used post-approval to monitor the developmental outcome of our projects. As example, let's say, clean energy project, it's a transport and logistics project, or it's even when we are lending our funds to a financial institution like BDSA, our funds are linked to direct projects. Currently, we have a line of credit for renewable energy. So we will monitor in terms of the use of funds in that sector, in terms of the developmental outcomes that are as the bank has mentioned, we are complementary to the efforts that that are existing, but the newness of our acronym will be tested in terms of how differently we apply ourselves as compared to the rest of the
Thank you very much. So thank you, colleagues. That brings us to the close of this first and very important, I think, scene-setting session which we've had. The scene has been set for us to now have very much more focused discussions on the very particular issues that arise in thinking about development. So I'd like to thank the Vice Chancellor who spoke this morning, and then Minister Zulu and Dave Wilkinson. Is Dave still here? Arisitas, Mr. Maisa, and Mr. Kitabire, and then Professor Komyakov, and finally Mr. Zmani, who rushed through very tempting slides there that I think many of us were very intrigued by, and so we'd love to see that full presentation. So thank you very much, colleagues. I'm going to ask Tricia to give us instructions about what we have to do next, because there is a very particular move that all of us have to make.
Thank you, Prof. We have quite an eventful lunch session planned for everyone today. Immediately from here, can we assemble just opposite the lunch area next to the tent? We're going to take a group photo. I just ask that you go there. We'll spend about 15 minutes doing that. One of my colleagues has a big camera. You'll see he's busy preparing out there. From there, we have lunch, so you can just make your way to the tent, there's a meal prepared for us. Thereafter, at 1 o'clock, we have a student poster presentation happening outside. So you're welcome to view the presentations put together by the students from the economics faculty here at the university. At the same time, at 1 o'clock, we have a short meeting that Mr. Malcolmson will chair with the Chinese business delegation. Professor Ken, I'll ask if you can bring your colleagues back to that meeting, and then we can reconvene. And we will spend about half an hour on that session. Yes, and we asked Mr. Zulu to attend that meeting as well. Thank you very much. Following that session, we then have two parallel sessions. The one session pertaining to economic development challenges will happen in this particular room. At the same time, we have another session related to the strategies for the fourth industrial revolution. You'll find that upstairs in room lecture hall 201. You'll have to go up the stairs here, 2 flights up, and then look for the board that says lecture hall 201. You'll find our logo at the door just to wait there. Following that, we break for tea for 15 minutes, and we'll reconvene here and have a plenary session related to the China FinTech dialogue. And from there, we'll close for the day. Thank you, everyone. Can we go have the photo?
But I'm Is it? What was it on?
The first one I had was just about it was financial related. It was more about the debt management. Yeah, and financial stability.
Where's the red bag? I think they said we should go take a picture. Yes. Bye. Oh yes, of course. How can I forget it? Oh, this is good.
So you and I are at the same time.
¿Vos llegaste a taller? No.
No, en Undiantes.
Ahora vive Madame Cruz. I want to go on Mariano que estaba.
Some guys even take the photo, Nico.
I need to do a WeChat call.
Oh, some guys just take the photo.
Oh,
Oh, it's tall.
Nyamalali. Awazi. Nyamalali. Oh, ngicabanga ukuthi indawo zakho.
Ngislow kakhulu mina.
Mina nge excuse.
So, I mean, so what I want to say to you is this project online collaboration must be about how do we reimagine and not just rewire, because they are just rewiring. What they're doing is now they want to do joint degrees and joint this and that's old stuff. Well, there's no innovation.
So the only the words were different, different, but the dance was the same.
But then but in the Rwanda, it's so elegant.
Yeah, in Rwanda we also
Oh, you
So
do?
yes, the northern part of Rwanda, which borders.
Yes, yes, yes.
Hey,
Hello.
how are you?
Good to see you.
Good. Hi, how are you?
Everything.
All right.
So we also we were talking because most of the video was really.
Is it possible to pick it up for me?
Yeah, you can go. They gave me a blank one because we didn't register, so you can just write your name.
No, it's fine. Then may I take yours? You just take another one there because I'm still trying to finish it.
Yeah,
How is that?
Yeah.
Hmm?
This is like
It seems that way. Kuna makazi mesa.
many sessions.
Mhm. Handbook, não tá
Oh,
Of those offices. Going to. Mhm.
Oh.
I sent this audio and you have the stage for 4. No, 5. Sabe la vez que solo yo no ya la
Ucho pangu hapo.
Was media there, the Nipa, and then there was what? I see.
Okay, just no, it's 2 years and I'll take that bottom one when I'm done.
Oh, yes. We want to hear from you.
It's just one moment. Yeah. So this order was. What should we do to get that? Like I have not.
This is your number. I'll speak to Tanya. I'll give her your number and she can just message you.
Now perhaps get 2 more. And at the end of the day, we will have to take all the water, that's half, but I feel like we shouldn't be wasting. You know, even if you like, take it home and go wet your plants or whatever, you know. Yeah. I wouldn't want to throw away. Not in the time that we live in. But we are obviously tomorrow can't keep people.
Yeah, of course.
Half drinking water.
Shall we just do a 6 cup?
So can I ask one of you just to go and check lunch for me?
Okay.
Is that right?